That's probably one of the most important parts about being in state parks is you got to be able to interpret what is out there to people that don't know a lot about what they're looking at.
Imagine a place where stress fades, fresh air fills your lungs, and adventure awaits around every corner. Welcome to Think Outside, the podcast that inspires you to explore, connect, and embrace the outdoors.
Hi, welcome to Think Outside. This is your host, Marcy Morey. Today we have a special guest host, Mr. Tim Morey, a natural resource program specialist within the Bureau of State Parks, interviewing Greg Sassaman, a retired DCNR park manager, assistant regional park manager, and then a regional park manager. The conversation occurred last April around Leonard Harrison State Park and the Turkey Path. I hope you enjoy this special episode of Think Outside with the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation.
So you came to Leonard Harrison in 1978. Tell us what the park was like then.
Well, basically, it was like Leonard Harrison left it, the lookout. There wasn't much else here except a run-down chain link fence and a trail out to the overlook area. The little park office, about the size of a one-room bathroom, and a new maintenance building, actually a pole barn. The old maintenance building burned down right before I got here. That was up at the overlook, too. We came here in 1978, my wife and I, to this area, and we had an inspection by National Park Service. It's a National Natural Landmark. So NPS had, I think the guy's name was Mr. Whitney, inspector that came here. Periodically they would do an inspection of their little sites like that around the country. And after he wrote up the report, that was a little bit, a year or two later after I got here, I used that as information. I said, I don't want to be the manager of a rundown facility that's a national natural landmark. Anyway, that's where it all started as far as what projects we thought we had to do and requesting ways to get money to do that.
That's perfect. My next question on here, I guess I'll just go into this. So this is kind of moving forward a little bit more, but what were some of the highlights of your time at Leonard Harrison?
One of the big highlights was Turkey Path, because everybody wanted to go down the trail, and it really wasn't a developed trail. It was just an old mule path that used to go down into the canyon, and there weren't many enhancements or rehabs to make it a real trail. And so we had planned, we came up with the ways to do that. One of the big highlights with that after we started, we actually had YCC, Youth Conservation Corps, and Pennsylvania Conservation Corps. So for me, the biggest highlight of that was the way to get materials down. And of course, we didn't have motorized wheelbarrows or any battery-powered tools in those days. We had manpower and, it turns out, horsepower, because we had a naturalist here, Greg Hornsby, who was also a horse logger, because the fact that he was a naturalist, he liked to do things the old way, and he actually had a draft horse. He said, well, I have a friend who's a logger, and I think we could get him to do this, to get materials down. We'd have to use what's called a stone boat. It's like a wooden sled with runners that you can drag behind a draft horse. And the biggest hurdle there was, I called the regional officer, hey, we'd like to do this, and this is what, he said, Bob Lyon was the administrative officer who took care of purchasing. I don't know how I'm going to get this through Harrisburg. He said, we never heard anything like this, hiring a horse to do park work. And a few months later, he called back, or a few weeks, I guess, maybe, he called back and said, we got approval. Believe it or not, we got approval. He said, I had to be creative in how to justify this, but it worked. And so we started with that, and the kids liked working with the horses too. That was a whole different thing for them. The horse would be hooked up to the sled. And the heavy stuff, timbers, concrete bags, stone, that type of thing, we'd take down. Because if you're in the middle of the turkey path, you can't get there from the top or the bottom with heavy equipment and materials. So that was interesting for us.
So the horse was able to take the heavy material to virtually every inch of the trail? Or were there areas that you couldn't?
Yeah, pretty much. Believe it or not, we had no incidents, no accidents, no injuries. And we had it for a few months. It wasn't a long-term thing, but it was enough to get down to start making the trail into a safe, decent facility that people could use and not get injured. Before that, with the path, before the rehab, there was, I wouldn't say daily, but there's lots of accidents during a week's time. Sprained ankles, people falling off the sides because they didn't know where the trail was, basically. And you still have that problem, I'm sure, even today with all the rehab. If people don't follow the signs, they're going to just go off to the side and go down in the waterfall or whatever. So, yeah.
We do still have that.
Yeah, you still have it, I'm sure.
We say, a lot of times we say most of, and it's true, 9 out of 10 injuries are off the trail.
Oh, yeah.
So just stay on the trail.
And they probably don't wear the right foot gear, regardless of what the sign says. And sandals and flip-flops and bare feet, it wasn't an everyday thing, but it was fairly common.
So to clarify, the main reason for the platforms and the steps, it was partly to help it be an easier trail, but was also to keep the user on the correct trail.
Yeah, that was probably as important as anything. And you probably still see the shortcuts in there that causes erosion and causes things to wash away. And it just causes all kinds of problems that it's hard not to have those problems no matter how many improvements you make.
We do see that. A specific question related to the turkey path that I've been asked a number of times I'm curious about is, so today we have battery-powered saws, and drills, and everything. Did you pre-cut the material, or did you cut it all at site? What were some of the details of the mechanics?
Most of it was done, whatever you could do before you got on the trail, we tried to do that. Of course, when you're working on those platforms and steps and everything, you have to be able to do modifications there. So it was a combination of all of that. But whatever could be done up top is what you try to do. And that's why we had the horse at that time, too, was get those done, load it up, and take it down. And we actually had 4 crews at one time, 2 on each side of the canyon. And so they didn't do just turkey path. That was the main focus. But they also did pavilions, sheltered tables. We tried to restore all the things that the CC, well, most of the things that the CCC had built here, and to keep them historic and interpretive.
About what year would this have taken? This would have taken place over multiple seasons, I would assume. But what years are we looking at here?
I think we're looking at mostly 1980, roughly 1980 to at least 1985. I was here till 1986, and we were still doing work up to that time, but I think the heaviest concentration was those 5 years.
So switching gears just a little bit, you're with the agency for a number of years. You must have seen a ton of change. How we do business continues to change today. What are some of the most dramatic or striking changes that you saw from when you started with the agency to when you retired?
I think the biggest change, I was just thinking about this last night again, the interpretation is the way it should be now, very close to national parks type interpretation and important focus on that. There wasn't as much of that in the late 70s, early 80s, but it kept evolving, and it still is. And that's probably one of the most important parts about being in state parks is you got to be able to interpret what is out there to people that don't know a lot about what they're looking at. But that was one of the biggest changes. The other big change was major maintenance program, where you could actually get money to maintain, or of course, then you'd have large project money to do the things like you're doing here now. that money was not available back in those days. And so it helps preserve things and help make things have better access and better understanding and better interpretation compared to what it was in, say, the 1970s and 80s.
So in reference to the turkey path, we see a lot of change through the seasons today. Imagine you saw the same thing. What was it like as you went through the freeze-thaw cycle of the winter? You got we have different structures that we have rocks fall down, we have trees fall down. Did you encounter any of those similar things?
Oh, yeah. There's continuous maintenance. The more structures you put out there, the more maintenance you're going to have, obviously. And hopefully the new types of materials, they're more expensive, but if you don't use wood and you can use the synthetic materials, that would help some of that. But nature always takes its course. And no matter what you do, it's going to destroy some things at some point. And so you have to have a continuous maintenance program that has, maybe if you don't even have dedicated staff, at least have funds that you can go in and repair or replace those structures if you want to still keep people safely going up and down the trail.
So when the park was first created by Leonard Harrison, it was a weekend picnic spot. I'm sure it evolved a lot through the years. Did you see a difference in users through the years as far as when they came to the park, what they were doing, even the type of visitor that came and what they were looking for?
Yeah, I think it's Leonard Harrison side of the canyon, at least, is still a destination for lots of people. The locals always use Colton Point more for picnicking and family get-togethers. They did use this one somewhat, like the lower parking lot, not so much the overlook. But the first couple of years, I think we had more picnickers. We had the sheltered tables up along the parking lots and still tables in some of the pavilions. But toward the end, I don't think most of the picnicking and day use types of things, other than looking at the view or the gift shop, was over on the Colton Point side, not the Leonard Harrison side. And I think if you look back in history with some of the newspaper articles, at least while the time I was here, we tried to do some more work at Colton Point to make that not so much more attractive for tourists. That was part of it, but it was to make sure we did improvements over there so that the locals would be able to have nice things over there too. And it might sound funny to say that was the locals' park, but it actually was, and still is, I think. So that change was not so much day use, picnicking, and most of the dyed-in-the-wool bona fide hikers are on the Colton Point side with the different trails. Other than the turkey path, probably isn't a lot of use on the Otter View Trail, and Leonard Harrison doesn't have any other trails other than the turkey path and that one. There's lots of history here, but you have to go out and look for it, and there's more of that on the Colton side than there is on this side, Harrison side.
So earlier today, we were up on the overlooks. We saw an immature bald eagle. I recognize that when you were here, it was about the time when they returned to the area. You also were involved in some other reintroduction of species. Can you tell us more about kind of the natural world side of things?
Yeah, it was not common to see bald eagles into the 80s up here like it is now. The first ones that we were aware of were in the Tyodotin area. That was probably mid-'80s, around the mid-'80s, that it was verified there's a nest in that area. And occasionally when you were on the overlook, you would see one drift by. And luckily, at least once or twice when you're up there talking with people, one happened to fly by. And that was unusual. Lots of turkey vultures, but not many eagles at that time. And so we, as state parks and DCNR, weren't heavily involved at that time with the eagles because we didn't have very many in the area.
So a number of visitors today wouldn't know much about that history, but the train was still running while you were here at the park. Can you tell us more about that and any interactions you had with the train?
Oh, yeah, there's several stories with that. The train always caused fires in the canyon in the spring because of the sparks off the wheels and everything. And we actually, our crew was a fire crew too, a trained fire crew. I was a fire warden, which most park managers were, and I'm not sure if they still are, but we all were then. And we actually went to the training, knew how to fight forest fires. And if it was like this time of year, like April or May, with the dry season, no rain, no leaves, you knew some place in the canyon there was going to be a train fire started. So, yeah, it ran, oh, I'm not even sure if it was daily toward the end. It was at least a few times a week, going all the way from Corning down through toward central PA.
Let's see here. Were you involved in the designation of Pine Creek as a scenic river in the late 1980s?
No, but we pushed for that the whole time I was here. We knew as long as the train was here, that wasn't going to happen. But I remember saying many times and thinking many times, wouldn't this make a great place to ride bikes or rail trail? And eventually it did become that.
What can you tell us about the old log cabin that was in the parking lot and that was recently moved near the overlooks?
That used to be the water supply for the whole park. And the spring house, it's still, I guess it would be south of there. There was a spring house where a couple springs came together. It's the only way they could get water at that time. And the pipes were on top of the ground, obviously, for a long time. And sometimes they'd freeze, but that would be pumped from there up to the storage tank. And all the storage tank did was provide water for the drinking fountain because we had no flush toilets or anything at that time.
One other that I thought of in between was the office that we're in here, the park office today. This was built in the 1980s, I believe, as well.
Yeah, I was able to be in it for maybe 2 years before I transferred to Cowan's Gap, but it was nice to be in a real office, to be honest with you. It was one of the first ones. They came as a kit. They built at least 6 of them at the time. I think Colonel Denning was one, Reed's Gap, a few other ones. Not Reed's Gap, but there were like 6 of them around the state. And we were lucky enough to get one. But because we had no running water, we had a Clevis Multrum in here, or a composting toilet. At least we could go to the bathroom in the office instead of walking out to a pit lane for 3 or 4 years.
A few things have changed over the years.
Oh, yeah, those kind of things really have. It's come a long way. Sure has, and it still is.
That it has. This is very detail-oriented, but I do recall a historic image of the area where the office is. I'm curious, was there anything here prior to the office being located here? It looked from those historic images as though there was something, maybe an old farmhouse. Do you recall anything?
No, not that I recall. Everything that was here, as I mentioned earlier in the interview, was up at the overlook. The office, the old maintenance building was down off to the side in the red pines below the office until it burned down. But when I came, the office was here because they took that little building. It was far enough away that it didn't burn down with the maintenance building. And they moved it down here closer to the entrance. And that's the only thing that was here at the time, was that little office. The maintenance building, they moved it up to where the present location is, the old pole barn, because it was away from the main overlook and they had space to do that down here. But this wasn't really developed that well at all down here. It was just a walkway. You didn't even have a walkway. You just walked up the road to the overlooks from here.
Talking about infrastructure, it made me curious. Was the campground here while you were manager here?
I think they built that right before I got here. It was pretty much just jamming in, not much planning to it, just trying to get sites that they could have some people camp on. And, while I was here, we did a lot of work on that too. And same with Colton Point. They finally got that off the overlook over at Colton Point.
You mentioned getting the camping off the overlooks at Colton Point. I believe I did see that on an old map. The camping was inside of a loop at Colton Point. Is that correct?
Yeah. If you See, you know how you turn into the park off the main road, and you turn left to go into the main part of the main park road. As soon as you turn left and right, that's where the campground was. Some on the left side, some on the right side. The left side, which would have been like toward the north, the upper part of the canyon, some of those crazy sites were almost right at the edge of the canyon.
I would imagine. There's not a lot of space there.
Yeah. So, people still used it, but I guess they like the view there too. But, we finally got that moved up above. That shower house that's over there now, that was in construction when I left. That was one of the last projects we got while I was here, was to have a facility other than the old CCC restroom that was there, to have that for the group camping and the group tent camping and the family camping.
And that's the restroom building that serves the group tenting and the campground still today.
Right. That was one of the first ones like that around the state, I think, is that one. At least in this region, if not the state.
What are some of your favorite memories of being here at the park?
I always liked, it might not be a professional reason, but it kind of is, because that's what we were here for. I always liked going to Colton Point and just being in the quiet over there, because that's the side that doesn't get all the activity that this side did. And actually, the projects that we did, was always good to look back in your career and say, oh, we started that from scratch, and at least we got it going and made it into a really nice tourist attraction.
And who would have thought some of those structures that you built down in the Turkey Path with the horse and those crews,
Exactly.
They're still there.
Exactly.
2025.
I mean, it did help you. We had to come up with a lot of unusual ways to justify things like that project in particular.
Any other favorite stories about visitors or staff? Any celebrities you met?
Well, there's two stories I can mention I thought of last night. They came to work one morning. Usually you would go up to the overlook, look around, make sure everything was okay up there, because you never knew until the next morning if something was going to happen up there with tourists or whatever. And back of the concession stand, they had a cedar enclosure, like 8 to 10 feet high, to put the garbage cans in and everything. A bear had completely destroyed it, smashed the whole thing down. There was nothing left of it to get the garbage. They usually took precautions, but they didn't that night as far as what they put out there, or grease or whatever. And the whole thing was ripped apart. And the other thing was over at Colton Point. There was a cabin there on the park forestry boundary. And the reason you look at things like that is in that area, it was in heavy porcupine population. And we had seen damage before. And this time when I went over, it was almost completely destroyed. All the windows were chewed out. They fell inside the cabin. So the door was all chewed off the hinges, because nobody had come for many years. They used to be hunters, but they got older and they didn't come all the time. And so, oh boy, I guess I better look in there. And inside, the cabinets like that were completely chewed off the wall. The sinks were filled up, overflowing with porcupine droppings. The whole cabin was covered. They just made their dens in there, I guess. And I got a hold of forestry and I said, you got a big problem. It was a forest lease campsite right on the park boundary. You couldn't use T111, which was a big popular thing then, because the porcupines loved the salty glue, and they just chew the boards apart. So it took us a while to convince everybody we can't use T111 again in porcupine country.
They like it as a snack.
All right.
What would you like people to know or to be reminded of when they think about DCNR and the assets that we have across the Commonwealth?
Well, north central Pennsylvania is always my favorite part of the state. And I think because of the PA wilds, and what I'd like people to know is that Pennsylvania is not a overpopulated state in most of the state. Just get out and see the wilder sections, the remote sections. places in the north. There's more to Pennsylvania than Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and Lancaster and Allenwood and Erie. It's what's in the middle that's important. And the more you get to use state parks and see what they have to offer, the more you're going to want to make sure they continue in perpetuity, and that you'll be an advocate for the outdoor facilities and things that we have to offer. I still say we, because once your state parks are always state parks.
Tremendous resources we have here in our backyards. Again, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Think Outside, where every episode invites you to discover new places, build confidence, and find inspiration in nature. Love the show? Subscribe for more inspiration, share with a fellow explorer, and let's keep thinking outside together. For more resources and inspiration, visit thinkoutside.podcast.org.